All right, so today I have Adam, Emily, and Jared, who I'm going to be doing my presentation for. And let's just go straight into it. So if you're a book reader or you happen to enjoy reading books every now and then, you probably have a specific genre or category that you're often drawn to the most, whether that be sci-fi, horror, fantasy, romance, whatever it is, or maybe even sad books. So by the end of this presentation, you will be convinced to begin reading sad books. And if you already do that, then the goal for you is to understand why it's good for you and the benefits. So sad books do not have to be depressing, but of course they can be and they often are. However, for me, sad books tend to be the ones that I can relate to, or ones that are a bit more of reality rather than just something sad happening. So it can be where in the ending, instead of the typical fantasy happy ending, it's maybe something more basic and realistic, but it's sad. So that's the point of that sad books don't always have to be depressing. So if that's your fear, then that's a good way to go for it. Understanding your emotions is really important when reading sad books. So knowing that crying is okay, that's often something that is feared by people and they avoid sad books because of it. And I just think it's important to understand that crying is a perfectly normal and healthy emotion that is really good to be expressed at times. And knowing when too much is too much, as well as listening to your body, both go hand in hand, of knowing when, like, if you're reading a really sad book that's maybe a bit too intense and you also have something going on in your life, that's when sometimes it's good to take a break or maybe pause from reading it for a while, because those are the times when it is a little bit too intense for you. So just knowing those boundaries. And downers have the power to lift us up. So what that means is basically sad books tend to have these changes and they influence us, and that often has the power to lift us up and motivate us, and it just changes the outcomes of our lives and what we are moving forward with. There are plenty and plenty of benefits, which is the main idea of this entire talk, to show you the benefits. So one of my favorites is that it helps us develop both empathy and compassion, which are two really important characteristics. And especially if you're reading sad books, obviously not the huge intense ones, but sad books at an early enough age, I think that those are better developed and it's easier for them to build onto that and become stronger and just understand your emotions a lot better. They help us to deal with the concept of evil. So what I mean by that is that they help us to kind of work around the things that happen in real life, where maybe there's something sad or depressing happening in your life, which happens to all of us, and that's just the reality of life. It often helps us to give the emotional practice for future grief. So along with those things that happen in our lives, grief is something we all experience at one point or another. And having practice for that is something not many of us get in life. So it's just another benefit to it. There are more benefits, as I mentioned, plenty more that I'm not going to be able to mention. However, some of the others are that they can be of comfort and let us know that we're not alone. That's a really big one, where many of us go through these trials and stuff and we feel very alone, and it's really easy to go to that place. So it's really important to understand that sometimes when you read these books, you're able to relate and kind of have a bit of comfort from that. They also have the power to make us feel changed, as I mentioned before. They can change our outcome, they can make us look at things differently, view things differently, and just overall build onto our personalities. And one of my favorites is that they allow us to process our emotions. I think that's a really big one that I've personally been able to relate to with certain books. They also help us release suppressed emotions, which is why many of us cry when reading something sad. And it's really, sometimes it's not even the book itself, it's really just those built up emotions that you're feeling the need to release. So, for those of you who are avid readers and enjoy sad books, you're probably wondering why this presentation is for you, but really it's to inform you and to hopefully get you to like reading those sad books and understand the reasoning behind why they're good for you and for your bodies. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about my favorite book very briefly, which is very sad and very intense. And it's The Child Called It by Dave Pelzer, I think is how you say his last name. But it's a very intense book about this guy's real life and his story. And it deals with a lot of trauma, abuse, neglect, just everything. It's really intense. But my point is that even though I really loved it, it also helped me to release some of those suppressed emotions that I had during that time of my life. So I just think that there's a book for everyone where that can work for them. Our mind and bodies are super important, and knowing what's good for our minds and bodies are really important as well. So if, like I said, you're reading something really intense, like that book that I mentioned, where it can maybe be too much for you, knowing when to take a break or step away from it is also really important. But reading is also really good for you, so that's another benefit to why these books are good. And avoiding them is not the answer, because many people like to avoid them because they think they're too sad or they don't want to feel depressed after, when in reality, it's kind of a good thing not to feel depressed, but just to experience those emotions better. We also need to know how to find a balance. So if you enjoy sad books like myself, or if you don't, there's a good balance between reading those types of books and then basically reading the opposite, or maybe something you prefer. So if you don't like sad books, reading something like romance or something about history, whatever it may be, whatever you're into, it's always good to find a healthy balance. And the moral of the story here is that reading sad books is beneficial, it is good for you, and it really makes a change within your lives, whether you know it or not. So that's it. Is there any questions that you guys have?
Nope.
No? Okay. Sounds good. Then that is everything. Thank you.
Yeah.
I agree.